If you go to the Museum of London between now and July, you will see a part of a Fatberg. A Fatberg is a conglomeration of oil and grease and fat and wet wipes and nappies and sanitary towels and condoms that have all congealed together in a mass. The one you'll see is a small part of a much larger whole. So Thames Water is the group that looks after the water and sewage system in London, and in September in 2017 they were doing a routine inspection on a sewer underneath Whitechapel Road when they found what is the largest Fatberg anyone has ever found. It weighed as much as 11 double-decker buses, and it was longer than Tower Bridge. It didn't look like this when they found it. It was a kind of thick, oily sludge with a fat white crust on top that had set hard like concrete. So they had to go down into the sewers and chip it off the walls with shovels and high-powered water jets. Now, as soon as they announced they'd found this thing, the director of the Museum of London said that they wanted a bit to put on display. So Thames Water very kindly saved a bit of the crust for them. Of course, it's one thing to tell the press you're going to put a Fatberg on display, it's another thing entirely to actually make it safe. This thing is straight out of a sewer, so for all they knew, it could have had Weil's disease in it, it could have had cholera, it could have had needles stuck in it. It was giving off toxic gases like hydrogen sulfide and carbon monoxide, and one of the samples erupted into a cloud of flies in the lab. So when they were thinking about how to display this thing, the Conservators looked at 4 different options. Number 1, they could freeze it. This has already been done in museums before. You might know the self-portraits of the artist Mark Quinn. He made a series of silicon casts of his head, which he filled with his own blood. One of those is on display at the National Portrait Gallery, where it's kept in a freezer. But that freezer is bespoke made, and it was probably quite expensive and probably took quite a long time to make, so that was no good. Option 2 is to pickle it. If you've ever been to a medical museum and seen organs in jars, you'll know how this works. But if you dunk the Fatberg into formaldehyde, it will dissolve. Option 3 is to coat it in plastic or rubber. But the Fatberg is actually corrosive. If you put a coating on it, it will eat through that coating. Some Fatbergs have even been found eating through sewer pipes. So in the end, they went with option 4, dry it out. Now that makes the Fatberg smaller and harder, and it also makes it a kind of dark grey colour instead of the white that it was in the sewers. But it means it's stable, it's not going to melt and stick to the case, and the bacteria in it are more or less dormant, so it's a lot safer to put out on display. This isn't the first time London has had a sewage problem. In the first half of the 19th century, London's population doubled. By 1850, 1 in 5 people in the UK were living in London. The usual solution back then was that you would use a toilet in your back garden, and that would empty into a cesspit, which was just a big hole full of poo underneath your house. Once a year or so, you'd hire a gang of night soil men who would drive their cart and their donkey up to your house, go into your back garden with a bucket, climb into the cesspit, fill up the bucket, drag the bucket back through your house, and empty it into the cart and drive it away. In 1852, flushing toilets start becoming more common, which you'd think would solve the problem, but actually you're just flushing a lot of water into your cesspit, which means you now have a runny cesspit. That means it's much easier for the sewage to leak into drinking water sources. London starts being hit with epidemics of cholera and typhoid and dysentery. At one point, the life expectancy for Londoners goes down to 37 years. One way or another, all this sewage is ending up in the Thames, and by the 1850s, the Thames was more or less an open sewer. It wasn't just sewage going in there. Factories were emptying their waste directly into the sewer. There was food waste in there. There were dead animals floating in it. The summer of 1858 was a particularly hot one, and the smell from the Thames got so bad that they had to close Parliament. Of course, when MPs are inconvenienced by a problem, the problem gets fixed. So they turned to the Metropolitan Board of Works and a man called Joseph Bazalgette, their chief engineer. Bazalgette had this huge ambitious scheme to basically build an entirely new sewer system underneath London. He was going to build 2 huge sewer pipes that ran parallel to the river until Barking. At Barking they'd join up with the river. The river's much wider at Barking, so if you pour sewage in there, it's not going to get clogged up. This was one of the most ambitious and successful projects of not just infrastructure, but of engineering that London's ever seen. And yet, it's all underground, where we can't see it or appreciate its scope. Or almost all of it. Bazalgette didn't just want to build sewer pipes, he also wanted to narrow the river in the middle of the city so that it would flow faster. So if you did dump something in there, it would get cleared out much quicker. So he took all this soil that he'd pulled out of the ground when he built his sewer pipes, and he used it to shore up the north bank of the Thames, and he built these 2 parks along the side of the river, and you can still visit them to this day, the Victoria, Albert and Chelsea embankments. However, if you've been down there, you will notice that the parks stop on either side of one particular building. The Houses of Parliament. They were built at great expense to the taxpayer, and the building project had taken a lot longer than everyone had budgeted for. They were not about to dig it up just to connect it to the sewers. Now that's not necessarily a problem, because Parliament's so close to the river already. If you flush a lot of water down, the water level underneath Parliament will rise enough so that it connects to the sewers. But that doesn't always happen. So instead you'd have this huge growing stagnant pile of sewage underneath the Houses of Parliament. You're free at this point to draw your own metaphoric resonances from that fact. It wasn't until quite a bit later that they built this huge pumping machine underneath Speaker's Garden, which is called the torpedo room because it shoots the sewage into Bazalgette's sewer. As for the Whitechapel Fatberg, it was recycled. It was sent to a recycling plant in Liverpool. And what they did there was they heated it up so that all the solid bits, all the nappies and sanitary towels and wet wipes, stayed put, and all the liquid, the oil, the grease and the water ran out. And that oil was put through a series of filters to make it really pure and clean so that it could be used in the production of biodiesel. But recycling is expensive. Thames Water spends £1 million a month on getting rid of fatbergs, and they have 5 or 6 on the go at any one time, and that money is coming out of my water bill. And this is a growing problem. It's only getting worse, and that's for a few reasons. Firstly, we have a lot more oil in our diets than we used to, and it's not just oil coming from food, it's oil from soaps and conditioners and moisturisers as well. Secondly, Bazalgette sewers are great, but they were not built to cope with 8 million people. And thirdly, people are just flushing stuff down the loo that is not meant to be there. So consider this your public service announcement. Don't flush nappies down the loo, don't flush sanitary towels, don't flush condoms. Those wet wipes that Andrex is selling you as an alternative to loo roll, they're what's holding these fatbergs together. The sewers are only built for 3 things: water, sewage and loo roll. That's it. If you're interested in Bazalgette's work, you can visit the Crossness pumping station, which is part of his system, and you can also visit the embankments where there's a memorial to him. The Fatberg will be on display at the Museum of London until the 1st of July 2018.